So last night, game two between the Orlando Magic and Toronto Raptors happened. Now, Toronto going into this game was looking to bounce back after a hard loss on a DJ Augustine three-pointer in game one. Now, particularly Kyle Lowry was the focus point of this game. I know everyone was caring about Kawhi, who had a beast of a game, and how the rest of the team would do, but the first order of business on pretty much any Raptors fan's mind was, how was Kyle Lowry going to respond after scoring 0 points in 34 minutes in game one? And needless to say, he responded perfectly. Immediately from the first quarter, Toronto bursts out with intensity. They just look a lot faster and more precise on offense and defense. And this is where Kawhi really started to begin to establish his dominance that we saw throughout the game. We knew after, well, I knew at least, seeing his first, couple of buckets drop, nothing but net, I had this feeling that he was going to take over and that we were going to see the true form of Kawhi Leonard. Why Masai Ujiri traded DeMar DeRozan to get Kawhi. We were going to see the reason unfold tonight. Now, before we go a little bit deeper, if you look at the Orlando Magic, their game plan was to obviously win the game, but they knew that the Toronto Raptors were going to hit hard. They were going to come out swinging with more intensity than they did last game. And, Orlando would have liked to take the game, but honestly, Orlando's mentality would have been, how do I put this? Orlando would have won mentally if they had made the game close. But this game was anything but close. We're looking at a score of 82 to 111, guys. This is not this was not close at all. Orlando did not lead at all during the game. So the Raptors came out, punched Orlando Magic in the mouth, and never let up. And Orlando just kind of got rocked. So yeah, back to Lowry. His first shot, what I think was a three-pointer. That was good. It was off the dribble, quick in transition. He nails it, top of the left key. He's doing good. And you can see that Lowry himself is more motivated this game. He's doing a lot better. Now, just an interesting statistic I found. Toronto is 2-14 in game ones. And this is throughout their entire franchise history in the playoffs. So to say that this is like an isolated incident with DeMar DeRozan and Lowry being, choke artists, I think is a little bit of a stretch, because you can see that, even with Kawhi, even after DeRozan's gone, it's still kind of just, the Raptors suck at game one. And it's basically a tradition at this point. So the rest of the first quarter was dictated by the Raptors really setting the pace and, like I said earlier, intensity of this game. They weren't letting any easy buckets go by. At one point, I think they were on a 12-0 run. And this was very early in the first quarter. And Steve Clifford calls a timeout at around 7 minutes midway through the first quarter. Tries to get his team, back into it. Tells them probably, listen, they're coming hard, they're coming fast. We got to respond effectively. Moving on to the second quarter. Now the intensity is even higher at this point. Kawhi is really starting to take over in the second quarter. But the problem of foul trouble continues. He has apparently, I think he gets 3 fouls early into the second quarter, and Nick Nurse makes the decision to stay with him. And there was one sequence that was so bizarre that Danny Green picks up 2 fouls, literally 2 fouls in one offensive possession, and they're back-to-back fouls. One is after, I think it was either Evan Fournier or DJ Augustine manages to slip through the defense and get to the key and tries to go for a drive, and Danny Green just smacks DJ Augustine, and he gets called for a foul. Okay, fair enough. Then he tries running around a screen and he gets called for another foul. So at this point, Nick Nurse is pretty furious, and Mark Davis starts trending on Twitter because, oh man, those are some interesting calls. Let's just say that. Now, the Raptors are really good at this point, and throughout the rest of the game, they were really good in shutting down the main contributors of Game 1, and that was DJ Augustine and Evan Fournier. right? They managed to contain Terrence Ross in game 1 to a certain extent, but that wasn't really the case in this game 2. Ross was, at the end of the first quarter, early second quarter, he was 4 of 5 from the field. And Aaron Gordon was heating up, and he did a really good job throughout the entirety of the game. But Ross and Gordon were essentially the only two players that were effective down the stretch for Orlando. Three-point shooting for the Magic. Now, I mentioned this in the previous video. The Magic shot the ball abnormally well in game 1. And they seemed to return to the mean in game 2. They were like, 3 of 15 or 4 for 15. The Raptors weren't much better until the second half of the game, of course. But, right, three-point shooting was not really that good for them. And without three-point shooting, the Magic kind of were not able to get the drives that they wanted, and they are being basically suffocated by the Raptors' defense. Now, another point I want to get to, and this is about Toronto, and something that's being kind of overlooked is we still are not good, well, in three-point shooting, I'm going to have to say. Now, I know you had Kawhi going beast mode, and you had Marc Gasol hitting a couple of threes, but overall, three-point shooting is still somewhat of a concern, especially for the bench unit. The bench unit cannot buy a bucket, or could not buy a bucket this game. Fred, I don't think he made any threes. Let's just take a quick look if he made any. Yeah, see, 0 for 2 from 3. Biggest concern, though, was Norman Powell. 1 for 6 from 3. This was not a good showing for him offensively. Now, I will say this. It didn't really come back to bite them as much because by the time the bench got involved in this game, Kawhi had the starters, I should say, had built up a comfortable lead and taken the Magic's three-point shooters out of rhythm. For the most part, Aaron Gordon was still lighting it up, but one man can only do so much when his team is not really showing up to the game. Now, I also would have liked to see a little bit more, a little bit of a better performance from Danny Green. He was okay. He was, I mean, I don't really take plus minus into consideration, but he was plus 23. He played some decent defense. He was 0 of 3 from the three-point. And Marc Gasol, I think, kind of picked up the slack in three-point shooting. He had some good back-to-back threes in the third quarter, and he was really, really kind of shouldering the load in terms of three-point shooting for anyone other than Kawhi and Lowry. Now, I was overall, while I was impressed with how the Raptors were able to string together a solid, first quarter, and for the most part second quarter, I was the most worried about the game at this point because towards the end of the second quarter, the Raptors got a little bit sloppy with the ball, and as a result, their focus and defense kind of suffered for it. And I think closing off the second quarter, we had only a 10-point Magic deficit. Now, I'm going to say, even though numerically speaking, the Raptors won the second quarter, I think overall the second quarter was won by the Magic. Because if you think about it like this. The Magic need to withstand the intensity of the Raptors. Like, probably what they're thinking right now is, okay, they're throwing everything they got at us. If we can just stay within striking distance and make our shots, they're going to run out of energy, and that's when we can capitalize and get back into the game or take a lead even. So I was a little bit concerned that the Raptors, after so many possessions, solid offensive possessions that just could not end up in a bucket, that they were only up by 10. I was worried that coming out to the third quarter, we were going to see the Raptors deflate a little bit, and the Magic, who were basically just kind of playing catch up, but, conserving their energy, so to speak, start to really knock down some transition threes and, close the gap. Needless to say, that did not happen. The third quarter is when threes started falling for Toronto. They started to hit a lot of the shots that they hit. As you can see on the post-game scoreboard, they hit in the third quarter. Now, Kawhi had 17, I think, in this quarter. He was monstrous. At one point, he was 10 of 12 from the field in 24 minutes. That's what I saw from Kawhi last night was almost the equivalent of 2017 playoffs in Game 1 in Oracle, up by 27 before Zaza does that, foot underneath landing and fucks up his tendon or quad or whatever, right? He was starting to look like his old self, his 2017 self. The man could not miss. Also, keep in mind that the 3 fouls that he had, right? He was doing this while understanding that shit, I got 3 fouls. I got to be a little bit careful in terms of how aggressive I am, as well as the fact that he was subbed out, earlier. So he managed to maintain his rhythm and continue to light it up with 3 fouls. And Nick Nurse's gamble definitely paid off. Like I said earlier, Marc Gasol kind of took over the 3-point shooting from Danny Green. Usually Toronto is best when they have at least 2 or 3 players that can at least nail 1 or 2 threes. And last night, while Danny couldn't do it, Marc Gasol could. They were leaving him wide open, and he made him pay. Good job. And Gasol, I think, really stepped up this game. He was great in game 1, but in game 2, you saw him just be a little bit more aggressive and assertive in his defense and offense, and it really did pay off. He wasn't hesitant on his 3-point shots. His defense, he was using his hands actively, but he wasn't slapping around, drawing fouls unnecessarily. So I'm thinking about at the third quarter, now that the Toronto Raptors are continuing to build upon their lead, if Danny or Norm catches fire, this game's over. Because at this point, prior to playoffs starting, Norm has actually been shooting the ball very well from 3. And if he could just, give his averages, hit half of his threes, we're seeing a complete blowout. Regardless, it still was a blowout, but hopefully Norm catches fire in game 3. Now, this was a 39-point third quarter. Kawhi has only missed 4 shots. 4 fucking shots at this point. He's 4 of 18 going into the fourth quarter. 4 of 18. And the thing is, in the fourth quarter, they don't even need him anymore. So, you know what Nick Nurse does? Takes him off. Is like, see ya. Have some rest. Get that load management. Be ready for game 3. Now, there was one point in the third quarter where the camera pans to after Kawhi gets subbed out for the final time. It pans to Masai Ujiri, crossed-armed, having a little smirk on his face, and he's just staring, yeah, I made the right call. This is what we traded for. This is playoff Kawhi Leonard, and it was awesome. But after the starters all went off, Steve Clifford also subbed out his starters because he knew it was basically over for game 2, and he just wanted his young guys to get play. It became Clank City for both teams. No one could really buy a bucket for the longest time, and this is also a little bit of a bigger issue in general with the Raptors bench. They're not really good this year. Well, not this year. I should say this playoff so far. They haven't been. I just feel like they aren't as. They're definitely not as good as they were last year. But more importantly, they're not really able to initiate or get any offense going. Their defense, I think, is fine, but offensively speaking, they're not very good. Now, when you slot in Marc Gasol, it kind of gets a little bit better, but not by a lot. They don't really have somebody that can just get buckets or do a good job initiating the offense. Now, I know Fred is supposed to man the second unit, but a lot of the times, Nick Nurse has him playing with Lowry. And yeah, the bottom line, the second unit needs to definitely get better. And I think it will with OG Anunoby getting back to health, maybe after the first round or second round or something like that. But if Orlando wants to, one area that Orlando could attack the Raptors is in their bench. Now, I know the rotation gets a lot tighter. Nick Nurse was running an 8-man rotation this game. But if you get, a lot of starters into foul trouble like they were able to do in game 2 and force Nick Nurse to go to his bench, you could potentially start to exploit their inability to get, points. With that said, though, game ended with Kawhi being a 15 of 22, 79.3% true shooting. This is very, very, very good performance by Kawhi. He straight up dominated the game. And load management definitely worked out for him, to say the least. Great job by Kyle Lowry. Probably not even acknowledging the criticism and just, powering through. Great bounce back game. Looking into game 3, Toronto needs to be able to maintain this level of intensity and focus, because now they're on they've lost home court advantage until they can get it back otherwise, and they need to go into the Magic's Magic's house and win a game. But if you're the Orlando Magic, you definitely want to maintain your home court advantage, because if you can beat the Raptors again, then the series gets interesting, because Toronto's going to have to play another game. It gets more exhausting for them, and this could signal Toronto, or not even Toronto, but this could make Toronto very fatigued in future matchups. I think for the most part, the reason why the Magic were not successful this game, aside from Kawhi blowing up, was the fact that Vucevic was contained. He was shut down by the Raptor defense and, Marc Gasol in particular. He was just not able to get involved in the offense. He wasn't able to, catch rhythm or anything. You had Aaron Gordon, who was just going up for threes, and he was really good. But if you look at this, aside from Aaron Gordon and Evan Fournier, who kind of bounced back in the second half, Ross is a chucker. So I don't really you can't rely, if you're the Orlando Magic, you cannot rely on T. Ross to be someone that can carry you. He is way too streaky, and when teams load up on him by just swarming him on the 3-point line and double teaming him, he's gonna either 1, take a bad shot, or 2, just clank it. And it's not, you needed DJ Augustine or Evan Fournier to really probably have at least 10 more points each to make this game competitive, right? As you can see, Vucevic, 6 points, 4 turnovers. He really, really got abused this game. I don't know what happened to Augustine. He kind of pulled a reverse Lowry. He was basically, he made his free throws, but he was not good this game. But overall, great game for the Raptors. A lot to study for the Magic. They got to find some way to get Vucevic involved and alleviate some of the defensive pressure on him. If they can unlock Vucevic, then this series gets a little bit more interesting. And then maybe Toronto doesn't run away with the game as they did in game 2. All right, that's going to be it for this one. I'll see you guys after game 3.